What happens to us after we die? Do we cease to exist? Or do we live on? This may be the biggest question that mankind has ever asked. Where do we go when we die? And who is there to greet us? And why? What exactly does it mean to become a spiritual person? Does it consist of following predetermined laws? Or is it a personal journey? These are the types of questions that we will discuss. Welcome to the Regression Session. Welcome back to the Regression Session. My name is Ian. This week we're going to be hearing from Julia, and Julia is a past life regression practitioner who specializes in QHHT or quantum healing hypnosis technique, as well as beyond quantum healing hypnosis. Her and I talk a lot about our experiences with bringing people into hypnosis and some of the nuances to that, so I'm excited to have her on the show. If you've had a past life experience, or if you're another past life regression practitioner, or if you just want to come on the show to talk about your views about what happens after we die, shoot me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com. So let's get into today's interview. Hey Julia, thanks for coming on to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today.
Absolutely. For the audience, real quickly, if you don't mind, just give a quick introduction about yourself and maybe your background and what led you into being a past life practitioner.
Well, I'm Julia Wagner. I'm 42. I'm in Lawrence, Kansas. And I started on this path, mostly I started chanting about 5 years ago, and that's what led me into interest in other spiritual pursuits or past life pursuits. So about 5 years ago is when I started chanting the mantra Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and practicing Nichiren Buddhism. And as I started doing that, I started finding that I could hear my, what you might call Buddha nature or higher self better and better. And so I was following these signs, following my heart, following these breadcrumbs. And that led me to something called QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique. I started watching videos of different practitioners. Some of them practiced slightly different methods. Some of them were QHHT practitioners. And just one thing led to another, and I had the opportunity to study. And so I took my class, got my certification, and I've been practicing QHHT for about 2 years now. And then I started practicing BQH, which is beyond quantum healing. And that's a sort of a spin-off method, very similar, a little bit different than QHHT. It can be done online, whereas QHHT has to be done in person. And I've been doing that for about 1.5 years now, facilitating past life regression sessions, sometimes that lead into some different types of sessions, things that you don't necessarily call past life. But that's been my most recent path, was chanting, following breadcrumbs on the internet, listening to other practitioners, and then eventually going ahead and getting the certification and starting in practicing.
So if you don't mind, for the audience sake, could you describe what the chanting is and what the purpose is?
Oh, of course. One thing to keep in mind is that you can take it as deep as you want to, or you can just leave it as a superficial chant, something that makes you feel good, that helps you feel aligned. The mantra is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and it's a dedication to the mystic law, which is the balance, the one law, mystic, the wonderful law. It's that force that is balance, duality, wholeness, magnetism. So that's represented in Myoho. Nam is the dedication to that idea. Myoho is the principle of balance. And then Renge means lotus. And people might be familiar with the spiritual implications of the lotus. It blooms and it seeds at the same time. So it represents simultaneous time, which might come in handy when we're talking about quantum healing hypnosis. Everything's happening right now. And the main thing to take away from that is that as we focus on a cause, we draw that effect into us just like a magnet. So it's talking about the law of attraction, you might say, as well. And it's all happening now. As we focus on the cause, we're creating the effect at the same time. And then Kyo represents the connections between all things, the voices of all Buddhas. So Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, it's a dedication to observing those principles, just studying them, becoming engaged with them. And I found that as I do that, the effects, the main effect was being more reflective. I was able to see things come up, and if I were triggered by them, I could immediately assess that and then decide what my emotional state, what I wanted it to be like. And that was such a change from before I had chanted and then after I chanted.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so it's more of it's like a mindfulness technique essentially.
Yeah, it certainly encourages mindfulness. I find the resonance itself is highly effective for all kinds of things. So the first thing that I noticed was, somebody I was living in a situation with a roommate, a dear friend, but he had said something that really insulted me. I don't remember what it was. I remember I had, for the first time, decided to chant the night before. So the next day, my roommate is in the bathroom and he has said something to me that I'm so pissed about. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, gosh, I could be pissed all day about this. And it's like I was scheduling, I'm going to be mad and I'm going to be mad all day. And then for the first time ever, I heard a voice in my head. I could hear myself thinking, myself talking. And that voice said, but you don't have to. And that was revolutionary for me. That, oh, wait, I don't have to plan all day to be mad. I can actually just, I can schedule something else. And I felt so relieved at that moment. And it was a direct correlation to chanting the night before.
So beforehand, I know we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but beforehand, you didn't hear your own voice?
No, I could hear that part of you, the thinking voice, the part that was like, I'm going to be mad all day. It wasn't like an audio type of thing, but the other voice really was. And so it was interesting that I had this sort of surly, judgmental, masculine voice kind of coming from the left side. And then from the right side, I had this softer, gentle guidance that was telling me things that were helpful. They were true and they were helpful. And so I decided at that point, hey, I'm going to at least listen to this one. And as I started doing that, that other voice, the one that was normally surly, they started getting on the same team too. And so they were starting to give me encouragement instead of the opposite. And so I equate those two parts of the brain now to what I might call the left brain and the ego, and the right brain and the intuition. It may or may not have that sharp of a divide, but they tend to act in those same ways. The left brain, it wants to categorize, it wants to file everything, it wants to understand everything right now. And the intuition doesn't need to understand everything right now. It already does, in a way. It has the bigger picture. And so as I've chanted, as I've been practicing quantum healing, you can integrate those two to where that ego, that monkey mind, the one that wants to nag, isn't repeating those patterns. It's actually getting on board. It's updating its equipment. It's working with the higher self instead of being so resistant.
Yeah, and you brought something up that I've found fascinating. I've talked to different people on my show about this, and I haven't really heard too many people talk about it, is the location of your own thoughts. And I think that this is a huge thing to be aware of, like where your thoughts are located in your own head. So for my thoughts, they're kind of located like in the middle, like bottom of my brain, like almost dead center, but towards the bottom. And anytime I've had any other thoughts come from any other place in my brain, it kind of felt a little alien, and like they've never come from there before, right? So I think that that's a very interesting concept that you brought up, and you're the first person I've heard bring it up without me bringing it up.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, for some reason, that left side of the brain seems very analytical, and the right side seems very nurturing and intuitive. And those seem to follow sort of the definitions that science wants to give us, or left-brained and right-brained people. And I tend to extend that to the ego as well. And as we stop thinking of the ego as this bad thing, then it stops it stops acting like that, it stops reflecting itself like that.
Yeah, and I've heard that too, and it seems like, as far as like the left brain right brain conversation, it sounds like from what you're talking about, both of them are yourself. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, absolutely.
So the reason that I talk about it is because and if we need to kind of put a pause on this and talk about it later, we can. But the reason that I kind of mention this is for communication with your guides, your spirit guides, right?
Mhm.
So if my thoughts are always coming from the middle bottom of my brain, and all of a sudden I get something coming from the top right of my brain, for example, I should pay a little bit more attention to that. And so that's kind of why I bring it up. So they are, you bringing that up is a little bit different, but still important. Whereas you're talking about how the ego isn't necessarily a negative thing. And I've heard that multiple times from multiple sources. So what's your perspective on that, as far as like the ego being portrayed as kind of a negative thing? Like, oh, you need to keep your ego in check, and why is that wrong?
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing's going to inflate that sense of resistance from the ego more than talking about getting rid of him. We don't need him. He's a bad thing. We're going to get rid of him. He's going to dig his heels in, and he's going to get really upset if we talk about him. That's my perception anyway. So I don't see that it's useful to view him that way, and it's not really accurate. So the way I tend to see the ego, I love to look at him, visualize him, and a lot of times I'll give my clients this exercise too, is I see him as sort of an office manager, and he's got his headset and he's got his microphone. He's got all of this sort of outdated equipment. It might be from the 1990s or something, He doesn't have a touch screen computer. He doesn't have all the new gadgets that maybe he could. He might have a file folder that has, file cabinet that has 5 folders in there that are labeled senses. Might be sight, hearing, our common 5 senses. And so if he's getting information visually that just doesn't fit in that box, or if he's getting audio information that doesn't fit in that box, where's he going to file it? He might throw it out. He might get confused. It's going to make him look bad if he doesn't know where to file it. So ultimately, what we're doing with hypnosis, what we're doing with trance states, what we're doing in altered states, we can give him extra file folders. We can update his office. We can give him a folder that might have just an asterisk on it or a question mark on it, where he can file all that information that doesn't fit. He doesn't understand it right here, right now. So we can help him do that. He doesn't have to be completely unconscious. He can even listen to the session. Usually when clients start to feel the ego wanting to take over, they're able to resist that and then listen again to the higher self, which that in itself is one of the different parts of quantum healing hypnosis technique and beyond quantum healing, is asking for the higher self, asking for the subconscious mind. And then the client can feel those different parts of the brain and how they do struggle, how the ego does want to be me, I. And then normally when we're talking to the higher self, they say we, or they'll say, they'll talk about the client in third person. They'll say they. So it's interesting, as the person that's experiencing that, to feel distinctly that ego, the left-hand part that wants to be I, that wants to be individualized, and the part that's connected to the collective. And just feeling that, even if nothing else comes out of a session, just feeling those two slightly different forces in our own body and recognizing that they're all us, they're all there for a reason, but we can use them in more and more appropriate ways if we understand their function, what they're good at.
That's a lot to chew on for a minute there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's a lot of new information for me.
And the ego during a hypnosis session, normally I tell the person they can imagine that the ego is taking off the headset, they're putting down the microphone, they're pushing away from that desk. They might have a book that they want to go read. If they chant, they might go chant their mantra. It's the ego's job to take time off, just like it's a long haul trucker's job to take a rest. It's not responsible for a trucker to drive 24 hours a day. It's not responsible for the ego to be in charge 24 hours a day unsupervised. He has to have some time off. And so we have sleep, we have those types of states, but to have a sustained period where the ego just gets to rest, he does not have to do anything, he doesn't have to worry about anything. That's priceless.
So, as far as the ego goes, a lot of people, they look at him. What's the best way to phrase this? They look, and you refer to him as a him.
Yeah, he just has a masculine energy somehow to me.
Okay, gotcha. So they look at the ego, it, him, he, she, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
as kind of like a hindrance or something that will hold them back, or you're not supposed to let your ego, and you need to keep your ego in check and stuff like that. But it sounds like you have a completely different perspective where your ego works with you, and that's not something that you hear too much about, as far as like ego when we're talking about the ego. Does that make sense? Just
yeah.
What I'm
I mean, even Dolores Cannon, who was the originator of QHHT, she would call the ego Mr. Stupid. So she didn't have a lot of kind things to say about him either. I tend to see that as an oversight, or, maybe a transgression. I think that we can do better than calling parts of ourselves stupid. They might be uneducated, or they might just need a little bit more tender love and care. Or they might just need to be brought into the meeting, or they give them the memo, for goodness sakes.
Okay. I get what you're saying. I'm picking up what you're laying down. So I've been told by a couple different alleged healers that the ego, that we should feel our ego, like we should let our ego out, and because we're not meant to like hold the ego back or stop the ego, and what's holding people back is when they try to hold that back. Like, for example, if I, let's just say I'm really good at piano, and I know I'm really good at piano, right? But but if I go and tell someone really good at piano, or tell someone that I'm really good at piano, then all of a sudden that's what's looked down upon, as like feeding into that ego, right? But they're saying that, these people that I've talked to anyway, are saying that that is what you're supposed to do, is to kind of feed that ego.
Well, I mean, you're supposed to be authentic. If you're good at piano, you say you're good at piano. If you can't play the piano, you don't say you're good at piano. If a person's saying they're good at piano and they can't play the piano, that might be something that's not authentic. So the best way is to follow your authentic desires, your authentic expressions, your authentic opinions. And it doesn't mean you always have to say everything you think. At the same time, like, if you're good at something, be good at it. I do think that it's, our nature to compare and judge, and want to bring people down in some ways. That, I believe that is what is behind that idea that we shouldn't be experience joy from what's joyous. If we play the piano and it's something that's joyful for us, and we want to express how joyous we are, how good it makes us feel, how wonderful we are at it, and we want to do that more, and it helps us get a job to tell somebody about our talent. How are you going to get a gig playing the piano if you don't ever tell anybody that you're good at it, or show them, and that's probably an even better quality to focus on, is your authentic expression of it. Instead of saying, I'm so good at playing the piano, you sit down and you play it.
Okay, gotcha. So it's more like being positive to yourself and not negative to others, then, is kind of what I got out of that.
Being authentic to everybody. Authentic and just with the appropriate reactions in any appropriate situation. I mean, in one person, it might not be appropriate to go, if you're at a funeral, it might not be appropriate to go over to the grieving widow and say, I'm really great at piano.
Right.
You might be. It's just not necessarily the appropriate time. On the other hand, maybe it is the appropriate time and that gets a huge laugh and that's what's supposed to happen. But we know in our hearts as we approach a situation, you can feel it and ascertain that. And that's where the different brain states help come in as you're actually approaching real life. You can take a moment, check, and then you'll have a sense of knowing what's right or wrong, what path you want to follow, what's going to bring you joy, and what's going to complicate things in a way that's more distorted and less authentic. And you start to be able to navigate that better and better and better as you focus on that. Follow one of my friends says, you follow the sparkle.
Okay. That makes a little bit more sense to me. I'm like I said before we started recording, I'm just a normal dude that likes to hypnotize people, right?
Yeah.
So all this stuff, there's a lot of new concepts to me, and I find it really fascinating. One thing that you mentioned, just kind of in passing, was the different mind states, or I can't remember exactly what you said, like the states of consciousness or the state of mind that that you have. I would like to kind of talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind, because I have somewhere that I want to go with this, but if you don't mind, tell me a little bit of your perspective on those different states of mind and what you meant by that.
Well, traditionally, we're in an active brain state. We stay in what they might call a beta brain state as we're talking, as we're alert. And then every 60 seconds or so, from my understanding, we'll slip into a slight trance state. So you can't really stay completely awake and alert and focused for more than about 60 seconds or so before you start to slip into that alpha state. It's a state that you'd be in if you're reading a book, if you're watching television. Usually when we're driving, we're in a hypnotic state. The trick with hypnosis is holding a person in that state. So then instead of just every few seconds, if every minute you're in a state for a few seconds, you hold that alpha state for about 30 to 40 minutes. And then if a person is in that altered state, that alpha state of relaxation, for just a little while, then you can easily ask, may I speak to your subconscious, or may I speak to your higher self? May I speak to your Buddha nature? Any of the different aspects that might identify as a intuitive or collective. And so you ask to speak to that part of the mind, the part that has the information of the body. And then that part comes forward, and typically that will induce a theta state at that point, which is a deeper trance state. And that would be the state that most people are in when they're just waking up or just going to sleep. You might kind of see some patterns. You might have some dreams that are just a little bit more significant. So that's the state that we work in. That's what I would call probably the most productive state to work in. I have had clients that have entered what I might call the gamma state, which is a godlike state where you feel like you're at one with everything. Somebody might call that ego death. You're at one with everything. They might still be able to describe that they have a body. They might know they have a body, but they're experiencing this extreme bliss as if they're in the presence of divinity. And I would call that a gamma state.
Yeah, and I've heard of that state being described with if someone takes too many psychedelic drugs as well, like too many mushrooms, like the ego death, where they're feeling like one with everything. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to compare the two. Yeah, I could say that one might be like the other one and assume based on the comparisons that one would be like the other. Although I've had people come into a session and I think this was during one of the group sessions that I was a part of. I wasn't leading it, but they asked the facilitator, they said, I don't understand. When I'm under hypnosis, it's not anything at all like when I'm ayahuasca. Well, right. That's a different, you've taken a drug. It's a different experience. So I don't want someone to come into hypnosis or a session and think that it's anything like taking a psychedelic substance, or everything's different from my understanding. At the same time, there's a similarity. There's a similarity between doing this and listening to binaural beats. There's a similarity between doing this and what I do with the Casino Mind Machine. So it stimulates the optic nerve.
Yeah, I guess if I had to describe it, it's like when you're taking a drug, the drug has control, right? So like you're pretty much at the drug's mercy. But when you're doing the hypnosis, you're in control, regardless of whether or not I'm guiding you through the hypnosis. You could literally just wake up at any time if you wanted to. But with the drug, you gotta ride it out until you're done with the trip, you know?
Hmm.
So the reason I brought that up is because I've I'm kind of interested in the correlation between these different states and different chakra locations. Okay. Have you heard anything about that?
I've heard more. I'm trying to think back to chanting, and there's correlations between the syllables of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and correlations on our body with the different chakra, the different energy points, chakra system. I tend to think of the different life states as different, in Buddhism, they call them 10 different worlds. So you're going to have, experience of humanity, you're going to have an experience of hell, you're going to have an experience of heaven, and those might be represented as places on the body as well.
Yeah, and I've heard that too, and I've also heard
I don't claim to
that.
be the expert though.
Right, yeah, me either. This is all just what I've heard.
Yeah, I love to talk about it.
Yeah, like I said, I'm just some dude, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So what I've heard, and I'll just get your take on it before I say anything after this.
yeah, absolutely.
I've heard that to, I don't know if you've studied Michael Newton or read any of his books,
Yeah, he
but
does the whole the life between lives and
right, yeah,
a lot of
exactly
after
that.
death stuff. Yeah.
So he talks about the past life memories being in the superconscious, I believe is what he calls it. So you have
Right.
your conscious mind, your subconscious mind, and then you have the superconscious mind.
Yeah, for the purposes of what we would be talking about, the subconscious would be interchangeable with the term superconscious. So in QHHT, we just call it the SC for that reason. So it's the part that would be existing above and beyond. Some people might call it the oversoul.
Okay, gotcha. So the subconscious and superconscious are kind of synonymous.
For QHHT purposes, yes. I think that Carl Jung, I think he called it the unconscious.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, there's different people call it different things, but they all mean the same kind of a general idea. So I've heard that to get to that state, you have to first travel from wherever your consciousness is up to into your third eye chakra, and you travel upwards to that third eye, and then you travel down into the chakra. I think it's called the earth one, that's located at the base of your spine. That's what some people have told me. What's your take on that, where you're traveling through the different chakra or
No,
energy pools or whatever you want to
yeah.
call them
Well,
to get
it
to
would
that?
depend on what you're exploring. My opinion, anyway. I don't know if this fact. My opinion would be it would depend on what you're exploring at the time. Since I do a lot of physical healing, physical questions, physical dealing with the physical body, I should say. Since I'm doing a lot of that with the quantum healing hypnosis technique, then you start to question based on where it's feeling in the body and explore the different energy systems and see what might be going on there. So yes, I would agree that we use the third eye, or at least when I woke up from my first session, my third eye was throbbing and red. So it definitely was being used. And I don't recall, going in that my particular session, it didn't feel like I was quote unquote using any chakras, but I wasn't focusing on my physical body during my session. With clients that I'm focusing on their physical body, often will travel to the different energy centers. And so we'll look at the root chakra where, most of the time we're looking at sexual abuse, or we're looking at some type of feminine energy that's been given away or taken. And then we move up to the sacral chakra, we're looking at childbearing, we're looking at womb health. And you keep going up, and then you're looking at confidence and the solar plexus, and looking at heart chakra issues anytime there's been a heartbreak. And you can see sometimes where there's a blockage, it may or may not be right on that energy point, but sometimes it can be something that's related to a death from a past life or some type of trauma from a past life. And then as you look at that particular wound, it seems to become what I might call a gravity point for other types of injuries or expressions, which is why I would say that you probably see things expressing so many different times in different lifetimes, is because of that, what I might call a gravity point. Something has been injured in a past life. Someone has died traumatically with a lot of judgment placed onto them, and they haven't had time to process that death appropriately. Wherever they're wounded, it might draw in other experiences that are expressing or reflecting that same energy over and over and over again. And so until you look at that gravity point where it first started, where the soul first expressed that illness or injury, it might keep happening. And that's the beauty of going, quote unquote, back in time, as you can see where it started. You can fix that point, figure out how to release the judgment, because it's almost always a judgment about something that happened as opposed to the thing that happened. It's usually someone's judgment about it. So you release the judgment. The person forgives themselves. They forgive their abusers. The abusers forgive the victims or say they're sorry. Everybody apologizes. The amends are made. And then that gravity point just disappears. And all the other things that we're expressing as a result of that realign, and the person doesn't experience that same type of situation.
Okay, gotcha. So like when the with the blockages and the gravity points, it's kind of like the concept of like attracts like, then, where you're just kind of attracting that same energy.
Yeah, you might have an attachment. There might be a soul that was out there that's disembodied, that's walking around, wandering around, and they see your light, or they see an injury that reminds them of their injury. One person, I think they had been hiking and they had fallen and they died. And so that soul saw another hiker who had an injury in the same place that his leg or whatever that had given out on him. He was trapped, I think. So he recognized that and he attached to that person just because it was something that's familiar. And so it's one of those like attract like, or the person might just see the light and be attracted to something that's just a little bit different.
Gotcha. That's fascinating. The reason I'm asking you so many different types of questions is because you're one of the first people I've had on here who's also a practitioner. So I'm just trying to pick your brain a little bit and find out your perspective.
Absolutely. I love it.
And where I was going with the chakra question is, I've kind of talked about this a couple different times on the show, but when this was brought up to me, the traveling through the different chakras, how specifically when you have to travel up into your third eye and then back down into your earth, I think it's the earth one. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, the root one, the one that's located at the bottom of your spine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one. So when this was first brought to my attention, something kind of clicked in me, and I realized that almost every single time I've done a regression for someone, the first time, because I've had people come back for multiple sessions, right? But the very first time that they do it, almost every single time they travel up somehow, some way. They usually travel up somewhere. I can't describe it. A lot of the times it's like, I feel like I'm supposed to go up, and they either walk up an invisible staircase, or they just float up, or they go upwards somewhere. And then when they get up there, something will happen or nothing will happen. And then I'll be like, okay, well, what's happening now? And they're like, well, nothing. I don't know what's going on. And I'll say, well, are you drawn anywhere? And almost every single time they're drawn back down. And so when that happens, and the person that told me this said that to me, I was like, no way. So it kind of almost like verified.
Oh, well, that makes sense. Well, and in the QHHT method, that's built into the script pretty much as well. You have them imagine they're floating up, and then they're drifting around, and then you have them float back down. So it's interesting. I'd be interested that correlates with our chakra system. Of course, everything's related.
And that's why I was asking you, because I was wondering if you had an experience that kind of correlated that as well. And it sounds like you do, whether you were conscious of doing it or not.
Yeah, I never thought about it. What I am conscious of is that I do move my own energy before a lot of sessions. There's specific songs that I'll listen to. And I did notice that for myself, I move the energy up outside the third eye. So I'm going up to the crown chakra and maybe even beyond. I just move it up and down, out and in. And so it's just kind of flexing all of the muscles. And when I do a visualization before a session, typically what I take a person through, and every session is different. So I may or may not do this with every single person, but I'll have them imagine that they're drinking a glass of water and that water's flowing through all of their centers, all of their body, their circulatory system. And then I move up to the nervous system, and then I move up to the energetic system. And so in essence, I'm kind of taking them through a visualization of all of the different energy centers, including the astral body, the aura, and having them feel it and expand it, and then ask them to visualize that everything is connecting and expanding. And we do that right before I have them go into any of the other imagination exercises or into a past life.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's really interesting. There's, everybody that I have actually talked to, because I've talked to a couple people who didn't want to come on the air, which is fine. But everybody does it a little bit differently, and I haven't heard that before.
I was going to say, one of the sessions that I had done to me, they had me imagine that I grew super tall. Now you're a giant. Now you're the size of a mountain. Now you're this. So and then shrink back down. So I wonder if that's sort of a similar application of that.
Yeah, it's just really interesting to think about because, like I said, I would have never even thought about it if she hadn't said that to me. And then it just kind of, I thought about my sessions like, okay, what can I grab onto that might verify this person? And I didn't think I was going to find anything. And then I was like, oh, no way. That's so cool. But yeah, cool. Most of the time, like it's usually just the first time. Because a lot of the times when you're familiar with how to get to that state, it's easier and easier for you to slip in the more you do it, right?
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, it doesn't usually happen a second or third or fourth or whatever time, but like the first time, that's what happens. It's weird.
Yeah. It's usually much easier the second or third time, any time afterwards. I did a session with my boyfriend just in the car. We were driving to the next city. I said, hey, you lived on the galaxy of Andromeda. What was that like? And I started asking him some very casual questions while we were driving.
Yeah, that, and that's really interesting too. And I definitely, if we can circle back to that, the way, I don't know how you do it as far as like, getting people into that state. But what's interesting about it and this whole entire like chakra conversation is when I do this, I believe personally that it's very important to let people describe their own experiences with little to no prodding or little to no guiding. So I let people just take it away, right? I don't really guide them too much. I let them have full control of their own experience. And what's interesting is everybody that's done it has done it without me telling them where to go. So it's like a natural thing that's happening.
Right. Yeah. Normally I'll ask for the most appropriate place or the most necessary time and place. And then sometimes after we've already been working, then I might ask for something a little bit more specific. Well, when's the first time their soul felt that way? And have them go to that quote unquote first time. Or I might ask, they might want to know about a lifetime with another person, and then ask the higher self, okay, tell them more about this lifetime they had with their dad, or show them more about that life, and they might go into another scene at that point. So there may be some guidance there, but ultimately I agree. I think that the more that the person is validating for themselves in general, the better. Now I have had clients that they want me to tell them the information, and that's kind of funny.
Yeah, I haven't run into that too much, but I know that there's people that can like, there's a couple of people out there that can like channel or allegedly channel people's past life experiences.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, and I can jump into other people's past lives too when it's appropriate, and I've had that information. But I think it's funny that there's an expectation that we might be able to do that. They're different applications. So I had this one gentleman that had been through a lot of different past life regressions, and it was always in that case where he was asking the other person to come up with the information. He wasn't being regressed. He was coming to somebody who could channel his past lives. And so that was how he trusted the information. He said, I've never done it on my own. I thought that's a perfect opportunity. I'd love to work with somebody and sort of share how they can do this on their own. And so I worked with him, and great session. Everything was pretty much textbook, went really well. And at a certain point, he said, I asked, so what do they call you in that lifetime? What's your name? And he wasn't able to get the name, but I did. And so I wrote it down. And so as he later went through the session, he got the name, and it was the same name that I had written down. And so after the session, I shared that with him. I showed him the piece of paper, and that validated it for him. That was how he knew his experience was real, which seems kind of backwards to me. But hey, I'll take it. I'll take it. Whatever the universe wants to give us, that gets a person their mind just a little bit more open to the experiences. I'll take it. And it was neat for me to see that that's a possibility. I don't do that all the time. It's not, I'm not psychic. I do get some, clear cognitive information sometimes, but I'm like, I'm an ordinary person.
Yeah, when I do regressions like that, I do it. This might sound different, but I try to be like almost scientific about it. So I don't ask if I can avoid it, any leading questions. I don't give suggestions, anything like that. I let people completely go through. And it's interesting that you say like verification. I want to come back to that too. I'm making some notes as we're talking, but real quick before we move into like that stuff and experiences that you've had as far as doing that, do you want to explain the process a little bit of your QHHT and your I think you said BQH, right?
Mm-hmm. I can go into just a little bit more detail. So most of those sessions, they last between about 3 to 5 hours, sometimes a little bit longer. So these are long sessions. The first part of the session involves a long interview. So normally ask the person all about their lifetime, how growing up was, what are they going through right now? What health problems do they experience? What discomfort do they have? What triggers do they face? Do they have any phobias? Anything that might have related to a past life or anything that they want to deal with during a session. And so after we've talked about just about everything for an hour, 2 hours, sometimes even longer than that, people talk for a long time. I don't cut people off. So it's however long they want to talk or however briefly they want to talk. They just have a couple things, that's fine too. And so we talk for as long as they want to talk, which I consider that's exhausting that beta state, that active state. We're just getting that ego just totally worn down. As soon as a person's like, I don't think I can talk anymore, that's a good time to start the session, at least for my style. Everybody does it differently. So then we take a break, come back with 15 minutes just to let everybody relax, get your environment set up. If you're doing a remote session, they can get their computer all set up and get comfortable. I come back and I do some visualization exercises. It's usually, especially if it's a BQH session, a Beyond Quantum Healing session, I'll have them go through different experiences where they're describing something very common, describing something that's a little bit unusual, maybe describe a meal they've eaten, just having them get used to using that part of the brain, that intuitive part of the brain. And then depending on what's going on with the session, some people are right there in a past life without any induction. I don't have to use quote unquote hypnosis at all. I might have them connect to an object that they've imagined, and then all of a sudden that object is representative. It's taking them back to another lifetime. So that's fairly common to not use any induction at all. If I'm doing a QHHT session, there's a script, and I use Dolores Cannon's script. And that's a method that pretty much works all the time. It's a wonderful script. And so then at a certain point, I'll ask them, go to the most appropriate time, the most appropriate place where there's information. And then usually very quickly, they're in another time, another place, something different's happening. Sometimes they recognize they're in a different body right away. and they'll start describing what might be going on around them or what they're feeling, what they're thinking. And we take it from there. After we work in that state and see what you might call a past life or different perspective for about 30 minutes, then we move into asking questions to the subconscious mind, the superconscious, the super oversoul, the Buddha nature, whatever you want to call that intuitive part. And Dolores Cannon, she asked the client, she asked the higher self, well, what do you want us to call you? And I just laughed. I said, we don't have a name. You can call us whatever you want to. And so that's where we get most of the work done, is in the higher self state and that theta state. And from there, I mean, not even the sky is the limit. We ask, why did you show this person the scenes that you chose to show them? And, you know, out of all the different lifetimes, all the information, all the genetic codes we have in our body, why did you choose that information? And higher self, sometimes we'll have some pretty obvious answers. Other times we'll have some answers that you wouldn't expect. And that's why it's pretty helpful.
So the method you use sounds pretty extensive, especially compared to the one that I use. So that's awesome, you know, and
yeah, but you can incorporate any of the elements probably from what, you know, I'm vice versa. We could each incorporate the elements of what we're doing and have the same type of experiences, because it doesn't take much to get somebody into another place and time. And then what you do from there, that's what I love learning about and expanding.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, especially coming from my background of, like, I didn't believe in anything like this. I almost did it as a joke the first time I did it. I was like to my brother, I was like, hey bro, you wanna see past life? And he was like, sure. And then we did it, and then I was just blown away. What's right?
Wow.
I'm gonna have him on the show to talk about it. But what's interesting to me is a lot of people, for their first time, especially people who may or may not have believed it beforehand, or maybe they did believe it and they've never really done it. It's once you slip into that state of being connected, or whatever you want to call it, it's almost like really natural. Once you know how to get there, it's like a natural thing. Like you were saying, hypnosis is like a natural state of mind. It happens when you're driving. It happens when you're just, like, if you go on a jog or if you're at the gym or whatever, you literally enter that state of mind. And it's almost the same exact thing where you enter this state. People say things so matter of factly, and like I've had people just tell me things that they had no idea about beforehand, and then that we were able to verify afterwards, like actual facts, people, places that I know that they didn't know about beforehand. So it's really interesting. Like you said, regardless of the method you use, you can really, it's natural to slip into this, which is really interesting. What I would like to do is kind of have you, if you'd be willing to, talk about some of really interesting experiences that you've had in doing this, and maybe some of the things that have or some of the stories that you've been able to verify after the fact with, like, actual proof, if you have any.
Yeah. Well, the one story that was neat for me was there's a client who had in another life been a part of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And so a historic event that's, you know, there's a lot of documentation of that fire. And so her experience, she had first gone to somebody else that was, you know, channeling information for her. And they were saying, well, I'm seeing that you've done this and you've done this and you're involved in this fire. And so she wanted to know, well, what was this fire? How did I die? What happened? And so then she came to me. First, she asked me, are you psychic? Which is always a great question to lead with. You know? And so very quickly, I started getting information about her. I got her family name. I got some of the things that, you know, basically family names, different histories, and the tribe that she's associated with. And so after I got some little tidbits of information, she trusted me enough to guide her session. And it was interesting because she's one of the first online sessions that I'd done. And so she came to me and she says, I don't want a cloud. I don't want to be hypnotized. I don't want to use a cloud. And I thought, well, it's a good thing I'm not using QHHT, because in QHHT, the cloud is an integral part of the script. That is the induction method. And so And so I thought, okay, well, I'm glad that I have another script. I'm glad I have another toolbox. I'm glad that this technique allows me to extemporize. I can make it up as I go. And so I asked the client, I said, well, what do you want? She says, I want a bus ride. And so I had her take a bus. And by the time she got off the bus, she was describing the things she was passing, describing the color she was seeing. By the time she got off the bus, she was in period garb and she was going to a home. I think she lived probably 3 or 4 different lifetimes during that session, but one of them was regarding the historic Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. So that one in particular was interesting because she was describing what floor she was on. She was describing her name. She's got her sister's name, her mother's name, and all of these things you can find them. You can find their death certificate. You can find pictures of them. You can find pictures of the elevator shaft. There may be discrepancies in history, but it leads me to believe that whatever they were reporting was wrong, as opposed to thinking that the client's memory was off a little bit. Say, oh no, the elevator went up and down this many times, not that many times, that type of thing. So that was really interesting to find, names and records of that person.
So had they done any research beforehand, but like of that fire?
They had it a certain point.
Okay, and were they familiar enough with like the victims' names and stuff like that? Were they able to name off before the session any names of victims or anything like that, or was it like kind of like
they were getting first names, and so they were able to give me family names, address, not addresses, but the street where they were living, different information like that.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, and I always ask questions like that just to verify, because if they had never done research, for any skeptics listening, that would be more significant, right? If they'd done light research into it, right?
Yeah. Well, they didn't do any research until they'd gone to the psychic, and the psychic says, this is what happened to you, and this is the fire, and this is what's happening. So it's basically a triangulation of information between the first person that did the first session, which was called a surrogate session. So this person didn't want to go under themselves. They wanted to have a practitioner like me go under for them. And so that information, the initial information, came from that practitioner talking about the circumstances of the fire. So then she wanted to know, is this true? Is this true? So that's when she comes to me, and she has her own session where she goes under. And again, I don't know why some people trust information one way and they don't trust it the other, but then she's able to come through with more information, more details that she hadn't researched. There may be a baseline of information to where you have information that's the headline of a newspaper article that you see. But then as you go into the session and you find, oh, first name, last name, then you're able to find another level of information.
Gotcha. And I would imagine that upon hearing about the fire, if I heard about that, my first thought would be to just look at the facts of the fire. Like, where did it happen? What went down? How many people died? I don't know if I would necessarily look into like the victims and stuff personally.
Right. You don't normally dig up from that information. You're digging down into that information as a corroboration, as a validation for what you're looking for.
Right.
But I also believe in simultaneous time. So it's interesting where, I've had clients come in and they say, well, I lived the life of a jellyfish, or, something like that. I lived the life of an octopus. And she says, well, I think I just made it up because earlier today I was watching a show about an octopus. And conventional logic would tell us that that's true, that one follows the other. But in quantum logic, you might say that the higher self had them watch that show in preparation for this experience that they were going to live.
Yeah, that's really interesting for sure. Okay, so one experience that kind of brought me to actually reach out to you was the experience about the person who lived life as an atmosphere. Would you be willing to describe that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that one was really cool. That was a QHHT session. It's one that I did in person with I don't want to say close friend. She's close friends with me now, but I think that was probably the first time we met, actually. So she was having this experience to where I asked her about to go to the most appropriate time, the most appropriate place. And she went to this place where she described herself as being the wind, as being the atmosphere. And I asked, what's your function? What do you do as the wind? And she says, I feel all of the creatures. I feel everything that's going on, underneath me on earth. And I gently blow the harm out of the way. I gently guide the beings away from danger, from pain, from fear. And so that was a really interesting experience, how engaged and how personified this thing that we just think of as a force is. I asked some questions like, well, how do you eat? What is a meal? How do you get energy? And she described a storm system. And that was a surprise, because I always assumed that a storm would be more like purging, like that's they're going to the bathroom, going to the bathroom.
Right. The rain is the pee, right?
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe there's parts of it that are like that too, but she said that's how they eat. That's their nourishment. That was really interesting to me, that is how she described getting energy. And I asked what death was like. If do you have experience of death? Because in every session I'll ask, let's go to the last day of your life. What's that transition like? What's it like to not have a body? So I didn't really know how to question the wind. So I just asked, do you transition? What's that like? And she said, yes, I gain a molecule. I'm adding a component and I'm turning into something else.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when you think of death, I typically would imagine losing something, not gaining something.
Yeah, I think of entropy, things falling apart and not existing anymore. At least that's what I used to think of. Now I think I probably have a much different idea of death after doing so many sessions.
Yeah, me too. I do. I would agree with that. I also have a very different concept of what death is. Yeah, that's really cool. I just it kind of blows my mind even to think about, let's just say it for skeptics out there, if it's possible that you could live a life as an atmosphere, that'd be pretty wild.
Yeah, just take a moment to imagine it. Even if you think that you're making it up, take a moment to imagine what it would be like to personify a force like that.
I couldn't even fathom it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's what I tell people. They still say, well, I'm making all of this up. And I think, well, gosh, if you can make all this up, why aren't you writing?
Right.
Seriously.
And if you're so one thing that I always bring up too is if I was going to imagine a past life, I would love to be Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar or someone like that accomplished great things or notable things. But in my regression, I was some random woman living in the 1730s that died in childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know why I would just make that up randomly. That's not something that I desired my past life to be. If anything, I want my past life to be in the Stone Age, because that's the time period I feel drawn to. And that didn't happen.
Right. Yeah, rarely do we get what we expect when we're going into a session. Yeah, I was the same. I had what Dolores might call a digging potatoes kind of life. Just going through the motions, normal. I was in 1860s Kansas for my first regression. So yeah, nothing glamorous, nothing that I expected. I had no idea that, anything. It just didn't particularly resonate. I thought, oh gosh, I just want to get out of Kansas. And so they showed me a lifetime where I was kind of stuck in Kansas and made the best of it. So they were showing me the difference in the options I have in Kansas now in 2021 and the options that woman had in Kansas in 1860. They were very limited. And it's interesting because when I went back to that town, I've been to the town of Abilene before when I was a kid. And so I might have some just subconscious memories of the town itself. But as I was driving there again, I just knew that that's where we lived. I knew at a certain point, well, we're in Abilene. It's because there's so many cows here, and horses and cows. And so I was driving through that town, and I could drive right to where everything I remembered was. I could remember, okay, the train tracks were over here and they'd moved. I found the new train tracks. I'm like, well, this isn't where they were. And yeah, sure enough, that's not where they were. Well, I remember my house was kind of to the northeast side of town. Well, it must be over here, kind of where this property is. Well, I remember the next town over, it started with a C. And then I kept driving, and there was Chapman. And I remembered, well, if we were trying to get to the other town, going the other way, like if we were going to a big town, we would take the river because the river flowed that way. And sure enough, that's the way the river flows. And so I'm remembering all of these things. And sure, some of it could be subconscious memories, but I'm remembering it actively in relationship to that past life. So it's really interesting to have that experience.
Well, Julia, it sounds to me like you're destined to live in Kansas forever.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's not so bad. It wasn't so bad once I left and came back. I think not having the alternate experience made me. I'm less romantic to leave. I'm less inclined to just. Now I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Back when I was here before, all we could do was sew, and that was the gist of my session, was how much I loved to just sew, because that was my only real expression. And now they're showing me that now here I could still sew if I want to, but I can also do this. I can get online. I can craft something on, I've got all these different media, all these different resources here and now that I didn't have back then. And so it makes sense that they would show me that life instead of glamorous in a palace or something.
Right. Or like being like Cleopatra or Joan of Arc or Marilyn Monroe or someone like that, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I've had those sessions too. I've had people that exist in history and been famous icons, and people that it seems like there's almost, how do you call it, like a narrative to which we are all able to access, to where when something's appropriate, that you or I or anyone out there that needed that experience could absolutely jump into the experience of Jesus Christ and what he was going through. They could absolutely jump into the experience of Cleopatra and what she might have been going through. You can absolutely jump into any soul's experience that it makes sense, without it necessarily having to take ownership of it. See, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. It's an experience. And so I have this feeling that we all have that ability, as we understand that we have that ability, or as it's appropriate, more important. I can jump into my boyfriend's past life to see something that's relevant to what he's going through, but I might not be able to just jump into anybody's upon request, because it might not be relevant. And so it's interesting that the allowances we have, how fluid consciousness is.
Yeah, that is very, very interesting to even think about, like accessing almost like a collective, like a hive mind kind of a deal.
Well, and also, and I was given the choice when I entered into my session. They asked me, are you a male or female? And I looked down and I could see my choices oscillating. I could see wearing a dress, I could see wearing pants. And so I could tell when they asked my higher self, well, why was that happening? They said, well, she could have chosen to live the life of Sarah, or she could have chosen to live the life of Sarah's husband, Wilhelm. And either one would be appropriate for what she's going through now, but she chose this life for this experience. So there I was shown Sarah's life. I could also see Wilhelm's life from Sarah's perspective, or even now I can kind of tap into his life as well. And so when I was trying to think, well, how could I live two lives at the same time? Well, because time really is simultaneous. It's all happening right now. We divide it into linear chronology for some purposes, and other ways and other purposes. So I had the choice. And then the other thing I thought of is, well, we carry around a lot of genetic memory. So if these are my ancestors, I would have Sarah's genes and I would have Wilhelm's genes in my body if I were descended from one of their daughters. So this could be something that I'm looking back in history, that these are people that I'm related to.
Okay, gotcha. That's really interesting to think about. Like also the genetic memory, the hive mind, the simultaneous time, all this different stuff. We could talk for hours about this stuff. One thing that I would like to ask you about, though, and this is like, if I had to pick a subject that fascinates me more than any other subject, it's the concept of spirit guides. So my question to you is, have you interacted with these beings? What, and if so, what was your experience like, and kind of how would you classify that?
Well, I'd say that everybody has their own representations. So we might have a representation of somebody that's familiar to us. We might have guides that have existed in our family, our genetic line. We might work with energies that we've worked with in other dimensions. So ultimately, I tend to think of everything as a reflection of us, our higher selves, source itself. Like we're an extension of source. We're an extension of the higher self. And as such, we're sort of an extension of these guides or their energies that we work with. We can put different labels or categorize them different ways, but we might just see them as entities or beings that have a different perspective, a broader perspective that's helpful to us. And so they might be an equivalent of the oversoul, they might be an equivalent of our higher selves, or they might be somewhat lateral to us. A person's brother can be their spirit guide, a person's pet can be their spirit guide. There's all different forms that they take. And we might call them animal guides, they might be angels. There's all different manner of beings and all different what you might call densities of beings. So it tends to be when we're looking at the higher dimensional beings, we're getting more clear answers that are more universal in nature. And as we work with more lateral energies that are more human or more 3D, those are more practical in nature, more personal in nature. And so they're all us, they're all aspects of us. We're interpreting that information through our senses. And so it's just a matter, we can constantly get what you might call a more clear universal message, or we can get a very personal message. So going back to that idea of the ego, and an unreflected upon ego might give us some very personal messages that aren't that helpful and aren't that universal. That unreflected ego might give us a message like, you suck, you suck, you suck. Whereas you get the ego on the page and it's going to give you those other messages. The more helpful and the more universal the messages are, typically the higher dimensional beings you're going to be working with. So that's kind of how I would describe spirit guides.
So just kind of like a fluid, almost like anything goes as long as it's helpful.
Yeah, I might connect with somebody that I've known on this plane. I have a mentor that passed away in March. I can connect with my mentor and he can still tell me things from the other side. I could call him my spirit guide. In another way, he's my teacher. In another lifetime, we're both learning. Maybe it's some lifetime somewhere I'm teaching him. That would be quite a neat thought. But we play these different roles in different lifetimes. And so I might call him a spirit guide. The first time that I went on a journey to find my spirit animal, I found a green dragon that lives in a cave and a winged lion. So those two energies or entities might be called my spirit guides. So I work with the dragon realm, and I work with what you might call Lyran energy or Lyran energy. And so those represent kind of two halves, or the yin and the yang of personality, of being. The dragon, she represents kind of the hoarding aspect, collecting energy and hiding it away in a cave. And the lion, he might represent that more boldly generous and courageous energy. He's outgoing and he's outside. They both can travel in each different realms. And so the way they might help me is, one might show me how to be more generous, and one might show me when it's time to be more introspective. So this is how they're used, how we'd like to think of them: helpful constructs, helpful frameworks.
Okay, gotcha. The reason I ask is because I usually, I don't ask it during the session because I feel like that kind of takes away from the experience. But after the session, I usually ask people, when you talk to your guide, because there's almost always, actually, I haven't had a session where there wasn't some kind of a guide.
Right. Yeah.
But I always ask them, did you feel like that was you, or that was like yourself, or does it feel like it was a separate consciousness or a separate person? Or separate entity, and almost all the time I've only had one tell me that it felt like it was part of himself, but almost everybody else is like, no, it was separate. So
Mhm.
I've come to look at these beings as like almost like a separate order or a separate collective of beings that are there to help you.
Well, and I might look at you as a separate entity as well, but I might also not in another sense. So it just depends on definition. I tend to think that we're one soul having an experience that's separated in time and space.
Gotcha. And but it's all happening at once though.
It's all happening at once. We have all these different filters that seem to make it separate, that seem to make us separate, that seem to make time separate, that seem to make events separate. They're just what you might, I don't want to call them artificial divides. I think they're natural, but they're divisions that can be transgressed. You don't have to order things in a chronological way. You can order them in any way that you need to in order for it to be appropriate. So a person can live a life in the 1900s, and then they could incarnate back in the Stone Age, and then they could come back to right now, and then they could die and come back as a flower if they wanted to. That might not be the normal chronology of things, but you can describe it that way and still be absolutely accurate. So yeah, I think that it's all happening now, and the way we assign the meaning. So we decide what's appropriate, we decide what we like, we follow our desires, and it's all just an expression.
Well, thanks for going over that with me. One question that I always try to ask is, and you almost kind of just answered it, but like, what do you think happens when we die? That's the question I usually try to ask.
I think that we're less limited after we exit the physical plane. So I think that we have more options, as many options as we have here, which is pretty much infinite options. We have infinite options times infinity. Like it's just exponential on that other side as we go from here to there. I do hear, and I'm starting to believe that it's very important what we're doing at the moment of death. So the more peaceful and relaxed and focused and aware and aligned, the more aligned we can be at that moment of death, it seems like the transition is easier. That being said, there's almost everybody that I've had a session with, they pretty much say that they've chosen that moment of death. At a certain point, they decide to let go or they decide to transition. Sometimes they're just bored with their life and they're old and they just want to go to the other place. I did my boyfriend's session, and he was living the life in the near future. And he was a frequency technician, and he'd been working on this machine with a team of people that changed the frequency of the landscape around them. And by changing the frequency of the landscape, they were able to visually change what they were seeing. Everything was different. If they had a tree that was out in the field and they changed the frequency, the tree would then look crystalline, for example. And so he did his work. They made this amazing discovery that couldn't be explained, but could only be experienced. So people came from around the world to experience this happening. He was able to replicate what he did with technology in his body, with his own vibration, with his thought patterns. And so then he could create these bubbles. He could just do it. And so he had seen one of these lands, one of these dimensions during all of this experimentation that he wanted to explore more. It was a place full of color and structures. And on his deathbed, he said, I want to go there. So that's where he went. And he transitioned right over into this place where, the way he described it, things just made sense. Things were harmonized. He said there's buildings, there's stores, there's resources, there's other beings. We all exist there. We don't have physical bodies like we do here, but we do have forms. And he described it as just all the colors being present, but more bright, all the smells existing at once, but still being completely discernible. So that's where he wanted to go, and that's where he went, and he explored that place. So that's one option. The other option is that you go basically to a place where you're restored. If you've had trauma, and I've heard clients say that they get to go to the spa where they're washed, and it feels like water, but they're describing it as light. They get to be washed in a light bath, and they describe as beings that are extra dimensional or looking like angels or light beings. They're helping them restore all of their parts and getting them back to one cohesive unit. Sometimes people will go to places where they just rest. Sometimes people will get a call and go right back into another body. So there's a few different things that seem to happen pretty frequently, and then there's some other things. There's no particular, like I said, there's less limits there than there are here. So pretty much anything can happen.
Yeah, that's kind of, I kind of tend to agree with you a little bit, where you're almost like changing just the radio frequency whenever you die. That's kind of what I've come to believe. However, most of my experiences with regressioning people is they're reincarnating back to Earth. I haven't really had any of the extra dimensional or extraterrestrial things or anything like that. I would like to, but that's not for me to decide, right? Is there a place, if people are interested in like doing a session with you, or they want to contact you? Is there a place, or like a website you have, or a blog, or anything like that?
Yeah, you can find me online. I'm at 5D Quantum Expansion with Julia. On Facebook, I'm at QHHT, Quantum Healing with Julia, or maybe QHHT Quantum Healing Hypnosis with Julia. I think is my actual title. And if anybody wants to contact me by email, feel free to email me. I'm at 5D Quantum Expansion at gmail.com.
Julia, thank you very much for coming on this show. I really appreciate you sharing your time with me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for asking me.
That's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Julia for coming onto the show, and I would also like to thank you for tuning in. If you're interested in working with Julia, you can reach her at facebook.com/5dexpansion, or you can shoot her an email, and there are links to those in the description of this episode. If you like the show, it would really help me out if you could subscribe and give a 5-star rating in your podcast player, and also share the show around with someone you think would also enjoy. Remember, if you're interested in coming onto the show to talk to me about your views on the afterlife or your piece of the puzzle, shoot me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com, and I would love to have you on the show.